السلام عليكم. محاضرتنا الثانية من مادة الفيكس بروستودونتكس تحت عنوان Biological Principles of Tooth Preparation. The preparation of a tooth is limited by 5 principles. The first principle is preservation of tooth structure. The second principle is retention and resistance form. The third one is structural durability of the restoration. The fourth one, preservation of periodontium, and finally, the marginal integrity. Number 1, preservation of tooth structure. The preparation of tooth must be conservative. That's to say, minimal amount of tooth structure must be removed, because excessive amount of tooth structure removal, in addition to the destructive phenomena, it has many harmful effects. I mean by the harmful effect, the thermal hypersensitivity, pulpal inflammation, and necrosis may result from approaching to the pulp closely. Besides that, the tooth may be over-tapered or shortened, and this might affect the retention and the resistance of the prepared tooth. The second principles of tooth preparation are retentions and resistance form. What I mean by retention? Retention is the ability of the preparation to resist the dislodgement of the crown restoration by forces directed along its path of insertion, while resistance is the ability of the preparation to resist the dislodgement of the restoration by forces directed obliquely or horizontally to the restoration. اللي أقصد بيه إنه بالريتنشن حيكون المقاومة اللي تبديها السن نتيجة force باتجاه الباث of insertion، بينما في حالة الريزيستنس يكون المقاومة اللي يبديها لتحضير السن أو يبديها السن من عندما تكون الفورس متجهة باتجاه مائل أو أفقي، يعني ما لها علاقة ويا الباث of insertion. فالفورس اللي دائما تكون ويا الباث of insertion هي دائما في حالة الsticky food or chewing a gum. This force is directed always along the path of insertion، فحتأثر لي على retention. بينما بالresistance للفورس دائما تكون ويا deflective contact to closure and or interference contact في حالة exclusive movement. هذه الفورس كما تشوفون بالصورة الثانية حتعملنا tipping للrestoration، تخلي الrestoration تفتر حول محور للدوران ونقطة ارتكاز، فهذا نقصد به إنه هو resistance form. There is a common idiom in fixed prosthodontic, which is a path of insertion. What do I mean by a path of insertion? The path of insertion is an imaginary line along which the restoration can be inserted and removed without causing lateral forces on the abutment. The crown restoration should have a single path of insertion to be retentive. Most of the time, the path of insertion of the crown restoration is parallel to the long axis of the teeth, but the crown for the anterior teeth, their path of insertion should be parallel to the incisor 2/3 of the crown, not to the long axis. So, the crown restoration should have a single path of insertion to be retentive. This is very important. Now, the factors affecting retention and resistance are taper of the preparation, surface area of the preparation, length and height of the preparation, diameter of the tooth or tooth width, and texture of the preparation. Besides, we can use accessory means. The first factor that affects retention and resistance is the taper of the preparation. What I mean by the taper of the preparation, or we call it a convergence angle. It is the angle that is formed between each two opposing axial walls of a tooth prepared to receive a crown restoration. مثل ما تلاحظون بهذه الصورة عندنا سن محضر. هنلاحظ التيبر أو ما نطلق عليه بالميلان حيكون 3 درجات من جهة الميجر و3 درجات من جهة الدستر. ف3 زائد 3 حيكون 6 فلهذا الconvergence angle حتكون عندنا بهذه الحالة هي 6 درجات. The magnitude of the retention depends on the degree of this angle, I mean the convergence angle. The greater the taper, the less the retention will be. As you see in this picture, the first picture, we have 3 prepared teeth. السن الأول من جهة اليسار حيكون تكون التيبر مالته تلاحظون أكثر من السن اللي بالوسط وعلى اليمين. فالريتينشن مال الأسنان أو الريتينشن for the crown اللي نحصلها بهذه الأسنان يكون في حالة في السن اللي بتيبر 3 درجات أكثر وأفضل من 6 و11. فلهذا يعني كل ما تكون التيبرنج أقل كل ما الريتينشن يكون عندي أحسن. وبصورة عامة the more nearly parallel the opposing wall of the preparation, the greater will be the retention. But parallel walls are difficult to be obtained inside the patient mouth. So, we use a tapering of 5 to 6 degrees, and so the acceptable convergence angle will be 5 to 6 degrees to provide the needed retention. And how I obtained this degree 5 to 6 degree? الدرجة هذه ما حصلها بأنه أنا أميل إيدي 5 أو 6، لا، 5 أو 6 درجات أحصلها بأنه burrs that are used to prepare the crown are usually constructed to be a taper. So the taperness of the burr will give me the convergence angle that I need. Now the relation between taper and resistance is the same relation between the taper and retention. The more parallel the axial wall of the preparation, the more will be the resistance of the crown restoration. مثل ما تلاحظون بهذه الصورة إنه عندنا 3 نماذج، نموذج A و B و C. النموذج الأول تكون opposing wall parallel to each other، وبالبي أكو tapering أو convergence angle أكثر، وبالسي over taper. فالresistance اللي حنحصله بحالة A حيكون أكثر من B، وحيكون B أكثر من حالة C. ال C حيكون B resistance كلش قليل لأنه صار التيبرينج عندنا over taper. فبهاي الحالة the walls of the tooth must be kept nearly parallel to achieve the adequate resistance form. Number 2, surface area of the preparation. Increasing the surface area will increase the retention. And the factors that influence the surface area are: first, the size of the tooth. The larger the size of the tooth, the more will be the surface area of the preparation. So, the more retention will be. So in this case, a full metal crown on a molar tooth will definitely be more retentive than that on a premolar tooth. The second factor that affects the surface area of the preparation is the extent of tooth coverage by the restoration. The more the area that will be covered by the crown restoration, the more will be the retention. Thus, in a case of full metal crown on a molar, it will be a more retentive than a crown that is a 3/4 crown or partial crown, because in a full metal crown, the coverage area is more than the 3/4 crown. And the third factor that affects the surface area is the accessory feature. When we add accessory feature to oral preparation, we will increase the surface area. In this case, we can use box, grooves, and pinhole to increase the surface area. Number 3, from the factors that affect retention and resistance is the length or height of the preparation. Increasing the length of our preparation will increase the retention and resistance, and vice versa. The fourth factor that affects the retention and resistance is the diameter of the tooth or tooth width. As you know, as the diameter of the tooth increase, the width of the tooth increase, the retention will increase because the surface area will be increased. But this is not as the same for the resistance, because under some circumstances, a crown on a narrower tooth can have greater resistance to chipping than the one on a wider tooth. مثل ما تلاحظون بهذه الصورة إنه السن اللي يكون with قطر أصغر حيكون الريزيستنس مالته أكثر من السن اللي قطره أكثر أو هو أعلى. ليش؟ لأن السن اللي قطره أصغر حيمتلك radius of rotation أو ما نقصد به محور الدوران حيكون أقل من محور دوران السن لو كان أعلى. As you see in this picture again, the wider preparation in B has a greater retention, but the narrower tooth in A can give greater resistance to tipping. That's why, because of smaller diameter, a tangent line falls low on the wall opposite to the axis of rotation, resulting in a large resistance area. فكل ما يكون السن قطره أقل حيكون محور الدوران عنده أقل، وبالتالي تكون الريزيستنس أحسن. في حالة إنه السن عريض ونريد نقلل أو العفو نزيد الريزيستنس، نقدر بهذه الحالة إنه نساعده أو نضيف له grooves, boxes or pinholes لنزيد الريزيستنس ونقلل قابلية الدوران. The texture of the preparation, it depends on the type of luting cement, because the luting cement will increase the mechanical interlock between the tooth and the restoration, so a smooth surface are less retentive than the rough surface. Number 6, extra retention mean. The retention of the preparation can be greatly enhanced by the addition of grooves, pinholes, and boxes. As you see in this picture, we put a groove on the buccal surface of the lower six to increase the retention. Sometimes we use pinholes or boxes. The third principle of tooth preparation for the crown is the structural durability. The preparation must be designed so that it can provide structural durability to the restoration. That's to say, the crown restoration must be rigid enough to not flex, perforate, or even fracture. And the preparation features that is related to structural durability are the occlusal reduction and the axial reduction. اللي أقصد بالstructural durability يعني المادة اللي أنا حأصنع منها الكراون لابد إنه أحافظ عليها الدurability يعني فترة البقاء مالتها، فلازم أعطيها thickness إنه أضمن بها هذه إنه المادة حتبقى محافظة بدون ما يصير بها perforation or fracture. According to the occlusal reduction, enough tooth structure must be removed from the occlusal surface so that the restoration can be built back to the ideal occlusion and thick enough to prevent wearing or distortion. مثل ما تعرفون إنه الأوكلوزال سيرفيس يتعرض إلى ضغط أكثر من بقية الأسطح مال السن، فلهذا يجب أن يكون سمك المادة اللي حنصنع منها الكراون أكثر في منطقة الأوكلوجن عن بقية الأسطح حتى تقاوم الثقب أو الفراكتشر أو أي ويرنج حيحدث. والأيديال أوكلوزال ريدكشن حيكون بين 1 إلى 1.5 ملم. And the occlusal clearance, I mean by the occlusal clearance, is the space between the occlusal surface of the prepared tooth and the occlusal surface of the opposing tooth. It should be evaluated in centric and eccentric relation. And enough tooth structure must be removed occlusally so that when the restoration is built back to ideal occlusion, it will be thick enough to prevent wearing or distortion. The functional cusps, as you know, are the cusps that give centric stops of the occlusion. They are the palatal cusp for the upper posterior teeth and the buccal cusps of the lower posterior teeth. بما إنه الفانكشنال كاسب حتتعرض إلى ستريس أكثر في حياة الأوكلوجن، فالريدكشن حيكون على الفانكشنال كاسب أكثر من الريدكشن اللي ناخده من النون فانكشنال كاسب. هذا على مود شنو؟ على مود structural durability. Besides that, the occlusal reduction must reflect the geometrical inclined planes of the occlusal surface. يعني الأوكلوزال ريدكشن مالتنا يجب أن يكون مع الأناتومي of the tooth، ما يكون بمستوى واحد، وهذا ما نطلق عليه planar occlusal reduction or anatomical occlusal reduction. As I mentioned, that the occlusal reduction should be a planar reduction or anatomical reduction, but we should avoid creating steep plans with sharp angle because it will lead to a stress on the restoration. On the other hand, the flat occlusal reduction should be avoided because it will lead to a thin metal at this area and this will lead to perforation of the crown restoration. مثل ما تلاحظون بالصورة اللي أمامكم التوث preparation في الفيجر A هو anatomical reduction بينما بالفيجر B هو flat occlusal reduction. التوث reduction في الفيجر B حيكون كلش قليل في منطقة developmental group والفوسا، المنطقة اللي يكون بها interference of the functional cusp. فهذه السمك للمعدن حيكون كلش قليل، يعني structural durability of the restoration حتكون قليل، فحيصير بها perforation أو fracture. وإذا حاولت إنه أصحح هذه بإنه أخفض كل occlusal surface lowering the entire occlusal surface حتى أوفر sufficient space للمعدن أو للماتيريال. I will interfere with the first principle of tooth preparation, which is the conservation of the tooth structure, and also I interfere with the second principle, which is the retention and resistance, because I will lower the entire occlusal surface, so I will shortening the axial wall of the prepared teeth, and I will reduce the retention and resistance. As I mentioned before, that the reduction on the functional cusp should be more than the non-functional cusp. And this, we call it a functional cusp bevel. So a functional cusp bevel is a wide bevel placed on the functional cusp of the posterior teeth to provide structural durability. The functional cusp bevel allows adequate thickness of the restoration at this critical area without undue sacrificing of tooth structure. فلهذا مثل ما تلاحظون بالصورة أمامكم عندكم A و B، أني أحتاج thickness الfunctional cusp أكثر من البقية، فحسوي beveling فقط للfunctional cusp بدل ما أسوي reduction أو أخفض the entire reduction. فبهاي الحالة إنه أني ما حضحي بالtooth structure وأثر على النقطة الأولى preservation of tooth structure. تلاحظون بالصورة رقم B الدنتست ما مسوي functional cusp bevel، فهاي المنطقة حتتعرض للستريس وبالمستقبل حيصير بها perforation or fracture. في بعض الحالات laboratory technician من يما يتصرف and he do overbuilding to the crown restoration in this area to provide structural durability for the restoration, but in this situation it will lead to a premature contact with the opposing tooth, and this is wrong also. Axial reduction, I mean by the axial reduction, the reduction we will do on the labial, lingual, mesial, and distal walls of the tooth surface. A sufficient axial reduction is important. Why? To provide a sufficient space so that the restoration can be built with sufficient thickness. And a sufficient thickness will prevent flexing of the crown restoration when the occlusal forces act on the tooth. The fourth principle of tooth preparation for the crown and the bridge is the preservation of periodontium. For the preservation of the periodontium, the following point should be considered. First, whenever possible, the margin of the preparation should be placed supragingival. Second, the crown restoration should have proper contact and pressure form occlusion and a healthy occlusogingival contour. The margin placement or the finishing line placement. The finishing line of the preparation can be placed either supragingivally, subgingivally, or equigingivally. That's to say within the level of the gingiva. But placing the margin of the preparation above the gingival tissue offers many advantages. First, it can be easily prepared and finished by the operator. Second, it provides good vision for the operator during preparation. Third, the impression can be easily made. Fourth, the patient can keep the area clean more easily. Fifth, most of the time such a position is situated on hard enamel. Sixth, and it is the least destructive. So, as mentioned before, and for the reason formerly mentioned, it is better to place the margin of the preparation supragingivally whenever possible. But there are some situations which require the placement of the finishing line subgingivally, such as when the aesthetic is important, so we put the finishing line subgingivally. Second, when we need extra retention, as in teeth with short crown, so we can increase the length of a preparation by putting the finishing line subgingivally. Third, when there is a caries or filling at the area of the finishing line. The preparation margin, as we mentioned before, should be placed on sound tooth structure. The last principle of tooth preparation is marginal integrity. For the marginal integrity, the restoration margin should have the following requirement. It must fit as closely as possible against the finishing line of the preparation. It must have sufficient strength. Whenever possible, it should be placed in area where the dentist can finish easily and the patient can clean properly. That's all about the principle of tooth preparation for the crown and the bridge. Thank you very much.